Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Grieving Voices. Today, my guest is Ed Owens. And before I go on my own spiel, I'll just have you introduce yourself since I don't actually have an official bio for you.
Okay.
Thank you for
Well,
being here.
oh, it's great to be here, Victoria. I'm super thrilled. I'm looking forward to doing this with you for a little while, and thank you for the invitation. Um, so, folks, for all of you listening, thanks for tuning in. Obviously, these podcasts can't happen without those of you that come back and listen and tune in, and we appreciate you. So, my name is Ed Owens. I'm currently the vice president of the Grief Recovery Institute. Which is we kind of our grief recovery method. Now that's just my current stuff. My life has had before all this, I had absolutely nothing to do with emotions. Emotions were not something I was comfortable with, and helping people with grief and loss was like not even on my radar. Um, very briefly, I had a dual career going on for most of my life. I was in the U.S. military and would eventually retire at almost 21 years from the Air Force Reserves. We can talk about more about that if you like to later. And then on the civilian side, I was in law enforcement for 23. So worked city, county, state, and with the feds for 23 years. So I had this dual career going on. I've got professional background, education, all this other stuff. None of it prepared me in life for dealing with emotional pain, grief, drama, whatever term you want to use, it's all the same, folks. Um, and yeah, but my path will eventually lead me here. So I'm a trainer with the Institute. I've worked my way up to the vice president of the Grief Recovery Institute, and that's now what I get to do. I get to work with grieving people all over the planet. And I'm just thrilled to be here.
And I am so grateful for the Grief Recovery Institute and for John James and this beautiful body of work that he's created because it changed my life. And I am certified as an advanced grief recovery method specialist through the
You are.
Grief Recovery Institute. So thank you for your contribution as vice president, which I must have been living under a rock because I did not know that you were the vice president. So congratulations on that appointment.
Thank you.
Um, and obviously, you're a man of great service and much service. So, what was the loss that brought you to grief recovery?
Sure. That's a great place to start. Like I said, like this is not something I ever thought I'd be doing. Whether it was military, or law enforcement, either one, those were not jobs where um, we embrace emotions, right? Um, Emotions can actually get in the way of getting the mission done or, you know, doing whatever we have to do in that terrible moment where we are called to help somebody, right? That's not the time to be processing or dealing with emotions. So both of my careers taught me to compartmentalize, and got really good at it. Both of my careers taught me to like compartmentalizing and stuffing down all of that, right? I could focus on what was in front of me, whether that was getting the mission done or that was a call or whatever. Um, and that's not to say that life wasn't happening that whole time, right? Like all of us, we experience an enormous amount of loss events in our life, right? Changes in familiar patterns of behavior in our life that don't feel good. Like we got a lot of conflicting feelings around them. I'm like everybody else, I'm not unique. Um, but I put it all in a box, right? Or multiple boxes. And I just did what society taught us, right? I used all the same tools that we all were taught to try and deal with stuff, keep busy, grieve alone, all that type of things. I did all of that stuff, right? And there's a bunch of other stuff I'm not proud of either. I mean, like I got into the bottle a lot, especially in the military. Um, and all of those losses kept accumulating. But to answer your question, the loss that brought me to the final, like, it all worked until it didn't work. I'm not saying it worked well, but it was all working and I was able to survive life, right? until the death of my 3-year-old son. And that loss, his death, broke open, I always say broke open Pandora's box, all the stuff that I had been trying to carry around forever. And I was completely overwhelmed with the death of Ryan. Um, and again, it's not about getting into the details or anything else, but nothing I'd ever done in my life worked. Everything came rushing forward at the same time. My world spun out of control. It spilled out into every relationship in my life. It literally felt like I was drowning. Um, and everybody told me, Victoria, oh, it's a life sentence of pain. You have to learn how to live your new normal, right? And you're never going to get over it. And you're never going, you're going to have to learn how to live with this and survive for the rest of your life. And as somebody who, like with my careers and everything else, like, what do you mean I have to just survive? No, that's not you. You figure out a way to deal with this. So I went on a mission, and for 5 years I stumbled around, always looking, and everyone kept telling me, like, you're not going to find anything, or on one hand, you're just going to have to deal with this pain, or on the other hand, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you thought about this? Like, and I'm like, hey, I haven't done that. I'll give it a shot. Nothing actually worked. I might feel better for a day, maybe a couple of days, but it didn't do anything with the emotional pain that I was carrying. And one day, somebody suggested, have you ever heard of the grief recovery method? Like, nope, what's that? I mean, because, like, seriously, like, I did all the things. Doctors put me on pills, didn't like them. I felt worse on pills. I felt like the first time, like, that must be what it feels like to get close to being suicidal. I'm like, I'm not taking those anymore. I did alcohol to numb the pain, you name it, I did it. And all the other stuff. Well, so lo and behold, I'm like, nope. So I had lunch with somebody who was a grief recovery method specialist named by Russell, years ago. I'm like, wow, I like what I heard. Went home, looked it up. Oh, there's a certification training coming up in 10 days. Now, I had no intention of being a specialist. I'm like, but I want to go through this. And they talked about, well, you can just do the personal work. So I signed myself and my partner up for it. I'm like, if I'm going, you're going. No, that's just for you. It's not for me. I don't need that. I'm like, well, if I'm going, you're going. You introduced me to this. It was actually her mom that was the specialist. In all transparency, that's my partner. That's Dawn. You interviewed her a couple weeks ago, I think. So we went together, and it was the last thing that I ever tried, and the first and only thing that ever worked. And it still works to this day. And I've been able to use that in all of the other losses that I've dealt with in my life. Go back and deal with, and complete, and finish what's unfinished. And it's never stopped working.
What has been your greatest, what was your greatest aha in the method that just surprised you when you first, if you can think back to that time?
Sure, I can. I can. I had a couple of two big ahas for me. Number one was the realization that my son's life and death taught me more than I would have ever taught him as a dad.
Wow.
And so that was super powerful, that awareness. And the feeling, right? Just the feeling around even his life was a gift, and as painful as his death was, it was a gift in my life as well. Um, and most people be like, "Oh my God, how can someone say that about the death of a child?" And I'm like, I can say that because it's allowed me to become a better, by his example to me and what he taught me and what I've learned through this whole thing has allowed me to be a better dad to my other children. It's allowed me to be a better human being and to show up in the world differently. And I attribute that all to that experience, coupled with the method guiding me through it. The other thing was after he died, I had a lot of misplaced feelings of responsibility, right? I was beating myself up. Like I mean, come on, military and a cop. I didn't keep my son safe. I failed to protect him. I'm not much of a man. I'm not much of a dad. I'm not being all the things, right, that I was beating myself up around. And going through the process, you know, without giving it away to all of our listeners who haven't been there yet, but part of it is we take an honest, really raw, deep, honest, emotional look at that relationship, the sweet and sour. And when we're doing that, we, if anything pops in our mind or on our heart, more importantly, right, we include it. And I had this memory, and I didn't know what it was about, but I was able to discover what it was about. The memory was rocking my son every night. I rocked him in our rocking chair before I put him to bed and stuff. And he would look up at me, and I'd see myself reflected in his eyes. And it was one of my favorite memories with him. It's like one of our favorite little routines that ended. And I always blamed myself, right? I would really, I mean, that was the worst of it. It was like all of the things I wish had been better or different, or if I could go back and change this X, Y, Z, this, all that stuff, like, and the whys that'll kill you. Um, but to realize, like, Brian only looked at me with love and admiration, and, you know, and he looked at me with unconditional. And I didn't believe after he died that I was worthy of love. I was worthy of anything. Um, and so to realize that I am the man that I saw reflected in my son's eyes, that I am that person, that dad, that, you know, um, that I can accept love, love for myself and love from others. That was huge.
What do you think is the state of I listened to a podcast recently that was all about the state of men and boys today.
Mhm.
Talking, it went from suicidal rates, it went from talking about the importance of marriage
Mhm.
for men, talked about just if, like, even divorce, for example, is huge for a man because if they're not in a relationship or they're not committed with somebody, and they're not a father, what's their place, right? And so the whole podcast was talking about these different aspects of well, why is the suicide rate becoming so high among men, and how can we address these various topics? And it talking about like the empowerment of women and how so many women went from depending, right, on financially and economically
Mhm.
on their a counterpart and
Mhm.
to support them, and how that has shifted and changed and the impact and the ripples that has had on men in our society today. And so I'm just curious if you can speak as a man,
Yeah.
speak to what your thoughts are on all of I know you haven't listened to the pod. Maybe I should have sent it to you beforehand. I didn't. I
Oh,
just thought of
cool.
that now. I should have sent it to you beforehand. I'll send it to you after and I'll link it in the
Yeah.
show notes because I think it's an excellent episode.
Mhm.
I'm not even sure why I listened to it, but it really had me thinking
Mhm.
about all of this. Anyway, what are your thoughts on the state of men and boys today?
Yeah, that's a complex issue. We could spend definitely more than an hour on that just alone. But high level thoughts, right? Um, let's walk it backwards, right? From that place where there's so much suicide. And that's an issue across the board, right? Especially in Western cultures. it's a massive issue, right? And everything we've ever been doing to try and prevent suicide, it's little wins here and there, but we are not stopping the trajectory. Like we need to do something different, folks. You can't keep doubling and tripling down and putting more resources into approaches that have not changed the trajectory of this issue. One of those things is people get to a certain point. I'm going to get to your thing, but I think we need to walk it from the point where everyone is aware to how did we get here. There's a quote from the Veterans Administration. They used to use it years ago with veterans, and it's, I don't choose suicide because I want to hurt anyone. I choose suicide because I don't know what to do with the pain. And that is a really, I think, an important way for us to frame how do we deal with this issue of suicide, regardless of the reason. These people get to a point where they are so overwhelmed. They've carried so much stuff they've put into their little backpacks or their little emotional storage tanks. Everything they've tried doesn't work. And it's not that, people who are hurting lack the courage to want to feel better. They don't. They're always trying. Even if it's not a smart choice, they're still trying to do something. But they don't have any tools, right? So the first place to really deal with this right away, fast, is how can we get more people the right tools that will help them have another option that doesn't include taking their life. So, because it's going to be a harder thing. They're both hard things. Like teaching people these tools and helping them to trust them is a hard sell. And the bigger societal issue, let's walk it back. Let's talk about it from a guy's perspective, at least from my perspective. And again, I'm one person, right? I'm one person. There are I don't know how many billions of guys on the planet. So like, there's going to be other people that will agree with me. There'll be people who don't agree with me, but this is just my take on it, right? There's a lot of mixed messaging that's out there in the world. There's a lot of messaging that says to be male is toxic, right?
Mm. The podcast even mentioned that even that phrase alone, toxic masculinity, is a terrible phrase.
Right. It is a terrible phrase. I'd say whoever created it, it was evil of their intention to create that phrase. Again, we're putting a very negative label on half of the population of the species and saying that if you are male, you have this and therefore you are bad. Well, that message will be internalized. Like if the younger we introduce that concept to little people, right, that becomes part of their belief system. Like, who's the greatest authority on the planet, folks, when we're 5 years old? Mom and dad. And if mom or dad, well, whoever it is, or society or their teacher or whoever says, oh my God, little Johnny, you're a male. Males are toxic. Males are abusive. Males are, male energy is bad, 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 bad. I mean, he's going to believe it because he'll take it in at 100% true. And now you're sitting there creating a situation, whether it's Johnny or Susie who's being told this. Johnny's internalizing, oh, I'm a bad person. And Susie's internalizing and believing that Johnny's a bad person. Right? We got to knock off the labels, folks. There's a lot of other terms, but for this. But again, when we teach children very, very damaging concepts at a super young age, they internalize it and believe it as 100% true. I'm not surprised that the marriage rate's down. I'm not surprised that all these things, I mean, there's a lot of issues. Again, like we could spend hours on this stuff. One of my degrees is behavioral science. So again, like we could spend a lot of time.
Part two?
Sure. Sure. But we have created a dynamic where marriage is no longer, or even like seriously committed relationships, like it's not the thing. It's like that concept is dying. And granted, society's evolved and changed, and maybe that's what's necessary. I don't know. That's not for me to judge. Um, but what we do have is a lot of single parent homes, right? For one reason or another. And there's so much research that what is needed to help in a healthy way develop a young person's life, trajectories, balance, all of these types of things. This is like part two. Like part one is we're teaching all these young people that half of the species is bad because they happen to be a male, right? And then the other part, of all this is we have, and again, there's a lot of research on this, the lack of both energies, the lack of a male and female energy, right? In the upbringing of a child, right? And in particular, there's a lot of research around the lack of a male in certain minority populations and those types of things. The lack of that is detrimental physically, socially, life choices they get on criminal path. Like the lack of that presence in a young child's life is almost like we're sentencing them to have a bad life in the future. And again, like I'm not pointing a finger. I'm not saying anybody's bad and all this. I'm just saying like there's plenty of research on this. We need to have, let's say like it takes a whole village to raise a child, right? So, but in a whole village, like there's a lot of males and females that become positive, hopefully positive role models and examples in these children's lives. And if we don't have that, and we only get one half of the situation, of the story, or the whatever, right? It's not balanced. Um, and depending on what that messaging is, it could be toxic.
And I think
Uh,
as young boys in particular, would you say, and even girls, or however you identify yourself,
mhm,
if you don't feel that connection and community within your own environment, you're going to look for it somewhere. You're going
correct,
to look for acceptance somewhere and
correct,
belonging somewhere. And
correct,
it might not be the most healthy environment conducive of someone choosing healthier choices for themselves.
correct. Absolutely. I 100% agree with all that. And all of this mixed messaging, all these different things, the bottom line is it puts boys and girls, men and women, in conflict with their own human nature, right? And then we could, like, again, like this is a topic we could explore over. But the bottom line is when there's mixed messaging, there's mixed, like, I'm not for, um, and anyone listening to this, like, I am not an advocate that any one gender or the other is better than the other. I'm not an advocate that either one can or cannot do this or that. I'm not that. I am 100% that what is it you want to do with your life? All right, let's do it. Because we are all capable of amazing things. When we are empowered, encouraged, nurtured, and loved on that path, absolutely. But just like empowering a young person and loving them and encouraging them and helping them can achieve great results, teaching them that this is bad and that is wrong, all these other type, like in a toxic way. And again, I'm not meaning to use that term a lot, but what we do on this topic is toxic. It's damaging. It's very destructive. Um, and a lot of people are in conflict with their own human nature on it because of the mixed messaging. Um, they're they don't know what's true. They try and force themselves to fit into a box. The problem is that box is always changing. That label's always changing. That dynamic is always changing. I mean, you can't go, I don't know, a couple months, or you can't go a month without there being something being changed, or this is the new term. Stop using terms, folks. Stop using label, right? And we have to have an honest conversation that presents both sides. I used to, one thing I've learned over the years in my careers and stuff is there's two sides to every story, but the truth is always in the middle. Um, no side, when you talk to two people, no side is true, is 100%. They have their take, their biases, their beliefs, and everything else. The truth is always in the middle. And we need to figure out where that is. And that takes both sides working together to figure out what that is.
I 100% agree. But you know, as we come to a conversation, we're always going to think that our what we believe is the truth, right? We perceive it as truth based on, to your point, our personal life experience
Yep. And our belief systems,
and our
what
belief
we're,
systems.
what
Yep.
we're taught to believe. You
Yep.
know, and again, like we're going some deep waters here, and you can edit this out if you like, but I think that this is also part of the bigger issue we're facing, here in the United States and around the world. Like we are so incredibly divided, you know. And again, I'm not saying one opinion is different than another opinion. I'm not saying one's right or wrong, one's better than the other or less than the other. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is we are so incredibly divided, right? Across the spectrum. And for me, that's worrisome. I mean, as a student of history, I love history and everything else. When people are divided, then they start to, minimize and demonize and attack each other, right? I don't care. I'm not picking sides on anything. But when we do that and we see the other people as less than worthy of us, or that like they're the bad people, that allows us to then dehumanize and the other side. It creates an us versus them mentality. And folks, all you got to do is look at history. Anytime it's an us versus them mentality, sooner or later that results in violence, unrest, wars, right?
It
And as a
happens, it happens on a micro scale in
oh,
households,
absolutely,
within family
absolutely,
units. It's
yeah,
just on a bigger stage.
it is,
It's just a bigger
but that,
stage.
but that bigger stage is also making it harder for the individuals within their own families,
Exactly.
right? Because there's so many. I mean, there's been a lot of issues that have happened in the last 5 years. And we don't need to get into the pandemic very detail. We don't need
Oh
to get
yeah.
into all this other stuff that's going on, right? Again, I'm not wanting to get into different issues. I'm trying people to see the bigger picture,
Sure, yep.
right? And that bigger picture is, we have like almost 8 billion people on this planet, and all 8 billion of those people have their own individual and unique belief systems. And people believe different things. And even if I agree with you that this is a good concept, I'm still going to have different ways why I think that's a good concept. Like we can't even all agree on the same thing all the time. Um, and that these bigger issues they we don't live in a vacuum in your household or mine. Like we don't live in a vacuum. It's not close the doors and our little world is kumbaya, and it's nothing but rainbows and unicorns. That is not the way this works, right? Everything we're impacted by all the stuff. What we see, what we hear, and that comes into our family. It comes into our relationships with our friends and our neighbors, our communities. And when we're looking at the other person and all this stuff is magnifying, all of what's going on, of course, it does impact those individual relationships, the ability to form close, intimate bonds and form a partnership, whatever that partnership is. Again, marriage, yeah. There's a million terms for all that stuff, right? But it interferes with it. And it creates this us versus them mentality, which creates more division. The more divided we are, folks, right? The more, by the way, I'll say that's pretty lonely and isolating. Um, but the more divided we become, the more conflict we will continue to experience. Um, we've got to get to a point where we don't see other people in our own household, in our own family, own neighborhood and community. We have to get to a point where we see people as human beings, right? And all of us as human beings experience sweet, joyful, and wonderful things in our lives. And all of us as human beings experience pain and loss, or whatever term you want to call it, grief, trauma. Again, it's pain. If it's emotionally painful, right, or emotionally joyful, we all can do this. That's the one thing I fully believe in my heart that connects us as a human species is our capacity to feel emotions and to feel the outcome, right? When things don't turn out the way we hope to bring. And if we could see each other as another human having human experiences who's also hurting, we don't have to agree. We don't have to agree with their politics. We don't have to agree with their societal issues. We don't have to agree with their belief systems. But if we can recognize that people are humans, we're emotional beings. We have the capacity for this. And we can try and figure out how to connect at that level, right? And then I think there's hope. There's more than hope.
I think there's one question that people could be asked that would unlock so much for people. And it's when you're disagreeing with someone or you're finding yourself in conflict with someone,
Mm-hmm.
asking them, what happened to you?
Yeah.
I think it's a simple question that when we go to the doctor and we have the aches and pains, and you and I both know it's probably grief and trauma manifesting in the body oftentimes. And the doctor never asks, well, what happened to you in your life?
No.
And I think when we're finding ourselves feeling activated about something emotionally and feeling ourselves, I hate the word triggered, but activated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, if someone were to ask you, what happened to you? What makes you believe that to be
Mm-hmm.
true? Well, that opens the door for compassion and understanding and listening and all those things that build and deepen connection. And I think that's one of the things you're alluding to is that we've lost the ability to connect.
Yes.
And why have we lost the ability to connect? And one thing I say oftentimes, I've said so many times on this podcast, is that we can only listen to others and be there for others to the capacity and to the depth that we've allowed ourselves to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I mean, would I love for the world to be grief recovered? I'm going to make that a new word.
Sure.
The world would be a totally different place if it was all grief recovery. Let's grief recovery the world. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think that by sweeping our own doorstep is where we can start in
I agree.
in our own homes, within our own communities,
I
because
agree.
we're not projectile vomiting all of our stuff, I
I
think,
agree.
on other people.
100%. 100%. Right. Um, we have to like I can't control the events of leaders all over the planet making choices, right? I can't control that. You can't control that. People listening to this podcast cannot control that. So but it impacts us,
Mm-hmm.
right? We feel this very intensely. Uh, and so you're 100% correct. What we need to do is first individually make sure you called it, make sure your porch is swept, right? I say we need to emotionally, right, increase our capacity, which means we need to emotionally get rid of things we're carrying with us that no longer serve us well, right? If the pain you're carrying for the last 20 years is serving you well, great, you can keep it. But if it's not helping, which has been my experience, it doesn't help over time. Um, then let's emotionally get rid of some of that stuff. If it's not serving your higher purpose, if it's not serving your life well, if it's not serving your relationships well, if it's not serving you anymore, why are you keeping it? And if we get rid of that, then I have an increased emotional capacity now to be able to better be there for the people in my life, whether that's as a role model, as an example. I mean, I can't count how many times, and I'm sure you've seen this too, right? Where people say, God, you know, this person in my family or my friends, like after going through these tools you teach, um, people have noticed the change in me. Like this is very common because once you deal with this stuff and you have an increased capacity to better show up more fully in life, to be a better version of you, other people see it and it ripples in a positive way through life. And that is, to your point, when we start with us, it ripples out into others. First, our little close nuclear family and friends, and then it goes bigger and bigger. And again, that increased capacity, right, that we have to better be there for others, then allows us to make a difference in our communities versus I'm stuck with all this icky things that don't feel good, right? And the last thing I want to do is get out into my community and do anything. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to come home. I'm exhausted. Everything in life is a chore and a struggle. I just got to get through the day. And tomorrow is going to be Groundhog Day all over again. I'm going to repeat, repeat, repeat. Right? But that is not a life, folks. That is not how you are designed to live. And if you find yourself in a situation where your life is about getting through the workday, getting through the things you have to do every day, being exhausted all the time, getting up and doing it again, if that's your life, my heart aches for you because we're not supposed to be there. We are by design, right? Here to love other people and be loved in return. We are here to trust other people and be trusted in return. It's our human nature. We are here to form connections with other human beings and to have those connections be a source of positive love, part of our life. But what you've been experienced up to this point is keeping you from experiencing life that way. You're not living a life in line with your human nature. That's not what I want from you.
As kids, toddlers even, we're taught cause and effect, right?
Yeah.
Oh, touch the oven, you get a burn, right? Don't do that again. You learn the first time not to touch the
Mm.
stove.
Yep.
And it's like we have to understand that our words matter, our actions matter, that there's a cause and effect.
Yep.
And we can either have a positive influence on the effect, or
Mm.
we can contribute to the negative energy
Yeah.
of,
100%.
yeah.
And we also need to sit there and understand that whatever choices that I make or you make or anyone listening to this, we're always a choice. I tell people all the time, you're always a choice. Every day you're making thousands of choices,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're always a choice. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a sweet thing and a sour thing, right? You can make a good choice that has a good outcome. You can make a choice that maybe is not necessarily the best choice, and you're getting less than an outcome. That's ideal. And sometimes we make choices that can hurt other people, right? And again, like there's a whole loving myself, loving other conversation we could talk about too. But we have to also get to a point, and I think there's a lot of this missing in our society too. People willing to take ownership and responsibility for the choices that they make that might be hurtful to another person. Um, Again, I'm not saying that. I mean, everybody makes choices, whether it's to have healthy boundaries in life, whether this is not a good relationship, I need to get out of it. I mean, it's going to hurt. We all make choices that are the right choice to make. But even when we make that right choice, we also have to, folks, be willing to take ownership and responsibility that I made that choice. Right? It's not, oh, they made me do this.
Mm-hmm.
No, I chose this because I love myself enough to make this choice. And not a but an and I recognize that this choice, right? I have some ownership responsibility for how this is painful. Okay. I mean, it's both things. It's not just one or the other, folks. Otherwise, again, it's us versus them. It's, we're playing this one up, one down game all the time. And if more people would be willing to take some ownership and responsibility, even when I make a choice that's painful and it's hurtful, or it's going to cause me pain or other people pain or my children pain or something else, even when it's a loving and correct choice, like getting out of a bad relationship. I'll use that example because you mentioned divorce earlier and on this whole concept. Um, even when that's the right choice, we have to take ownership and responsibility that we made that choice.
I know our time is winding down, but I really do want to give you the floor or the mic, so to speak, about something you and I are both passionate about, because I'm a veteran too, about the work that you are doing with veterans and the importance of grief recovery, just in case anyone with some pull happens to listen to this.
Right?
Well, you and I have both individually been working to do, me on a local level, which is, door slamming in my face. But the importance of trying to bring grief recovery to the veteran community. And I would just love you to share what you've been working to do, what Grief Recovery Institute has been working to do, and where
Sure.
things are standing in there.
Sure. So take a step back. So John was a Vietnam veteran. So the first thing I want in your audience to hear is this whole thing was created by an old Vietnam combat vet. Right. So if you're military and everything else, and you're thinking like, oh, I don't know about this thing, yeah, whatever. This was created by John that was his background. It was also created from a place of he was hurting. He was emotionally overwhelmed. He was about to was contemplating taking his own life. And he wanted to find a different choice. Right. And I think that's important on this military conversation is that this whole thing was created by a guy who was hurting, who wanted to have a different choice than what so many of his brothers and sisters would do. All right. So that's where we start with this. And for the entire history of the Grief Recovery Method, the Grief Recovery Institute, we've been working with veterans and trying to work with veterans and trying to get this in front of them. The last 8 years, 10 years, um, we've had a lot of great inroads. Like we've always done some good stuff with the military. Don't get me wrong. But we've trained a few hundred, chaplains and social workers and people within the military branches, Air Force and Army primarily, few Navy, National Guard, active duty, and reserves. So we've been really fortunate to make some really positive inroads within the Department of Defense. We also have made a lot of positive inroads and continue to train, I would say almost monthly, people from the Veterans Administration across the country. And then, of course, there's different veterans organizations we partnered with and have trained specialists within those organizations. And that's all great. And we've made a lot of positive inroads. And so getting these tools and skills into the hands of veterans so that they have them to use in any aspect of their life, whether it's their military service or whether it's their personal relationships, which, by the way, the personal relationships and the high divorce rate and high alcoholism and all those other things, that is the behavioral outcomes and choices made because they're hurt. When I hear people are going through all of these things, like you mentioned earlier, my mind and my understanding of things is what has happened, right? I know that going on is not happening in a vacuum. So that's where we've really tried to do a lot of this. And there's a lot of specialists like yourself and others, right, who are either veterans or they're not veterans, but they love working with veterans because their partner is a veteran or their dad, mom, or dad served. we got to take our wins where we can get them. One here, one there, that type of thing. But I will tell you from the Institute's perspective, we have trained, and in the last, I would say, 8 years, a lot of specialists that are out there doing the work inside the military community, um, and on military bases. And we've had folks uh, in the military who've taken it downrange. For those of you that don't know what that term is, that means forward deployed, right? To hotspots, you know, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Middle East, there's one Navy um, specialist that I know who was an advanced specialist like yourself, who work virtually, doing things with the ships at fleet that are at sail and doing one-to-ones. So again, like we're slowly getting this more acceptable within the culture, military culture. And like anything else, it takes a long time to change the culture of any organization. Organizational and behavioral change is challenging.
And it's not just veterans too. I mean, grief recovery is kind of is starting to trickle into prisons
Yep.
and first
Correct.
responders
Correct.
as well.
Correct. We've got right. We have specialists working in all of those areas, and jets, and hospice, and senior centers. Just every religious or spiritual type of group you can imagine. I mean, it's going. It's very heartwarming to know that we have expanded into so many different parts of our society that historically we were just not there. And we still have a lot of work to do. I still have people that tell me all the time when I talk to them, like, oh, what's the grief recovery method? I mean, again, it's we've been around for over 45 years, and that doesn't mean that people know that we exist.
Exactly. Yep.
And doing podcasts like this helps to help raise that awareness. If you're listening to this, folks, and you've not had a chance, please, go to Victoria's website, read up on some of this stuff. Go to Grief Recovery Method, .com, and you can read up on stuff. The more that we become aware that there's other information, other tools, other skills, there's things that we can do to educate ourselves and then make a choice. Remember, we're always a choice, right? And I hope you choose to at least start learning more. And if it feels right, I always tell people all the time, folks, you got to trust your intuition. If your intuition says this feels right, I want to keep looking. I want to know more, right? And if your intuition says, nah, this isn't for me, then great. I wish you well, and thanks for at least being open for a moment to take a look at something. But the more people can become aware of it, the more people that at least know there is something else, the more we can help. And by the way, we don't just help adults, we help children, right? Getting back to this whole conversation, like we were talking about earlier, like folks, we've got to do a better job as adults, as positive male and female, both in the children's lives, whether that's your family, your nuclear family, whether that's your extended family. Like we have to be the positive role models. We have tools for you too, so that you can teach them to children versus teaching them things which may or may not be the most helpful to them, which create the confusion, which create the issues, which create a lifetime of trying to struggle to figure out what they're in conflict with their human nature. So we have those tools too. So like we do a lot of different stuff. And I would encourage you to at least pause and be curious. I think I want to learn a little bit more about this. And it's a great place to start. And then from there, folks, you can talk to people like Victoria, get on our calendar, say, hey, tell me more. and let us have an opportunity to have a heartfelt conversation.
And I would add, what do you have to lose? Because, like you
Yeah.
said earlier, it's what you've been doing probably isn't working. Probably hasn't been working for a long time. And that was
Yeah.
me too, over 30 years, right? Like,
Yeah.
I got this. I can DIY my emotional trauma. Yeah.
Right. And again, I say that to people all the time. Like, hey, look, if you like how your life feels and you like how everything is and this is all good and it's working for you, okay, cool. You can keep it. But the problem is most of the time when I'm talking to people, they aren't happy. They don't feel like they're living as fully as they could be. They're tired of feeling alone and isolated or sad, or those days come around on the calendar and it just ruins the week. I mean,
It's like you said, surviving. It's you can either survive or you can thrive, right?
right? It's choice. Remember it? See, there's a theme here. It's choice. People can choose. You can choose to live your life in survival mode, or you can choose to not let the experiences that we've had in our lives define us. Of course, we learn things from it. Of course, we can learn, we can grow, we can become different people because of the experiences and the losses and the events in our lives which shape us. But folks, they are chapters in your life. They are not your life. And it doesn't mean that whatever you've been through in your life is now the story of your life. You are at choice. You can choose how to write your own story. You cannot choose and control the events that take place in your life that impact you. You're human. But you can choose how you show up after these things happen in reaction to what happened. It's a choice to deal with the pain of whatever's going on in your life, or deal, by the way, embrace and lean into the joy and happiness. It works both ways. It's a choice. Some people choose not to embrace and lean into joy and happiness and connection because they choose to isolate. That's a choice. That's a heartbreaking choice, right? When I see that happening. But again, it's a choice. I mean, folks, how do you want to show up? What do you want to do?
The phrase that got me, I think, that resonated with me the most was have the courage to take a chance to make a change.
Yeah,
And it does take courage.
it does. And people who are hurting have never lacked courage. They just don't
That's
know what
true.
choices they got. And again, we can only make the choices, we can only, choose what to do based on what I know. And I can only use the tools and information to make choices, whether they're good choices or not, until I learn better skills and tools so I can make a better choice.
Yeah.
Again, this whole thing boils down to that. If you like the way the tools are working, great. If you don't like the way they're working, let's show you some other things that you didn't know before, or maybe you'd heard like a piece of this here, a piece of that there, but we didn't put them together in a way that's like, God, why didn't I think of that? you know?
That's what I
Uh,
think about grief recovery is why didn't I think of that?
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we do the best we can. And this isn't a judgment, folks. All of you have been doing the best you can to navigate life with what you were taught up to this point. And that is not a judgment, right? At all. I I just want to give all of you just a big hug. And because you're listening to this, you're curious about other potential tools and options and things that you can make different choices with. And I applaud you for that. It's because when you learn other information, skills, tools, you can make different choices. You can have a different outcome. And or not, it's a choice. You can choose to be right, hold on to painful things that have happened in your life, right? Or you can choose to be happy, but you only get to pick one. I hope you pick happiness. I hope you pick joy. I hope you pick connection, love. That's what I hope you pick.
Beautiful way to wrap this up. I would love to have, I desire to have a part two, possibly.
Sure.
Maybe after you listen to that episode, I'll share it in the show notes, like I said. I'll
Cool.
link your Grief Recovery Institute also in the show notes and my information where people can find me as well. But where
Perfect.
can people find you if they're just listening to this, where they can connect with you?
So if you want to connect with me, the easiest way is if you want to put my email address in the show notes, it's Ed Owens, one word, at griefrecoverymethod.com. You can also go to griefrecoverymethod.com and go to the About Us page. You'll see about me. Um, I also have a micro website on the on there. If you want to just link my micro website, that allows you folks to send me a direct email message. There's a calendar link to jump on my calendar if you want to have a conversation. Love to talk to you about whatever it is you want to talk about. Um, you can read more about me that way.
And if you're listening to this and you work with first responders or you're in charge of first responder department or police department or EMS or veterans organization or hospice or anything like that, and you want to bring grief recovery into your facility and organization and community,
Mhm.
Ed's your guy. Please reach out to him.
I would love to have a conversation with any of the audience who would like that conversation.
Yeah, the more people we get certified in this, the farther this can spread. And I think that's the goal here. So thank you so much for being my guest.
Oh, it's been an honor. I really appreciate the invitation. I look forward to part two. And for all of you that were listening, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching to the end. See you next time.
And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.